Welcome back, class. We are talking about material monism. This is the second lecture on material monism. We looked at some of the features of the worldview last time, and we also talked about some of the reasons a person might be attracted to this worldview. Today we want to look at some of the objections to material monism. So on the handout, there are 3 arguments against material monism or materialism. You can see those here. This is number 5. The first argument against material monism or materialism is based on the relation of the most fundamental feature of the physical universe, which is change, and our most basic concept, which is eternal. So the first argument against material monism is going to look at the nature of matter, and notice that it's always changing, and we're going to look at the concept of eternality. So can matter be eternal? Remember, whatever is eternal is independent, self-explaining, self-maintaining, and if matter is eternal, it also would have to be self-maintaining. So an argument, let me refresh your memory. An argument uses premises to logically support a conclusion. Arguments are valid and or sound. Valid has to do with the form of the argument, and soundness has to do with the form and the content of the argument. So this is an argument that has a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. This is something you would probably want to put on a note card and commit to memory, the first argument against materialism. So let's look at the major premise. If the material world were eternal, it would be self-maintaining. If the material world were eternal, it would be self-maintaining. So this is an if-then. So anything that is eternal would be self-maintaining. That premise is not very controversial. But the minor premise is, look at the minor premise. The material world is not self-maintaining. Now, the material monist would say, yes, it is. And the non-materialist would say, no, it's not. So we would need to give reasons for the minor premise to support that claim that the material world is not self-maintaining. But given these 2 premises, if the material world were eternal, it would be self-maintaining. The material world is not self-maintaining, we get this conclusion: the material world is not eternal. So this is the first argument against material monism. Now the question is this argument sound? Is it valid, and are the premises true? Well, I can tell you it's valid. It's an instance of modus tollens, the mode of negating, where an example would be if P, then Q. Not Q, therefore not P. If it rains, then it's wet outside. It's not wet outside, so it hasn't rained. This is always a valid argument form. Now, the question is, are the premises true? The first one is true because it's a necessary truth. Is the second premise, the material world is not self-maintaining, true? Well, we'll have to look at the reasons for the minor premise. Okay, so now let's move down the handout a little bit. Look at number 6. It's talking about the major premise and what it assumes. The major premise assumes that there must be something eternal, which is an argument we've previously gone over. What is eternal is not dependent on anything for its continuing existence. And if all is matter, then matter must be eternal. Second is that if something is self-maintaining, it will continue without any change, or if it changes, it's a matter of recycling. So we'll have to see, is that a possibility? Maybe the universe is recycling. We also talked about this in our last unit. There are no unique events in an eternal being or cycle. So remember, you can't have a one-time occurrence. So you can't have the universe beginning or ending if it's eternal. All right, so let's look at the reason for the minor premise. There are going to be 3 reasons. We'll call this number 8, the reason for the minor premise in general. That's what this one is. In general. Number 9 is the reason for the minor premise in parts. And number 10 down here will be as a whole. So we have 3 reasons for the minor premise. The first is that the reason for the minor premise is the physical universe is highly differentiated in terms of hot and cold. These differences interact, and the interaction continues until sameness is reached. Sameness remains sameness. It cannot return to differentiation. All right, what does that mean really, though? It means in the universe, there are hot places like the sun, and there are cold places like places far away from the sun, like Pluto. And these differences between hot and cold interact, and they interact until sameness in temperature is reached. Think about if I have a hot cup of coffee in my office here, and it's a cool office, that hot cup of coffee is going to cool over time and is going to become room temperature. This is the second law of thermodynamics. The first law of thermodynamics says that matter is neither created nor destroyed once you have matter in existence. And the second law says that everything is moving towards a state of entropy. So everything is running down. The sum total of the usable energy in the universe is running down. It's running towards sameness, entropy. Now, sometimes students have a hard time getting their head around this, so you can Google this, look up the second law of thermodynamics and do a little research. But this principle holds that things are running towards sameness in temperature. So sameness, once it's reached, cannot return to a highly differentiated state like it is now. So if the universe were eternal, then we would have reached that state of sameness already. We wouldn't have hot places and cold places. Right now, it seems as though this high level of differentiation means that the universe is relatively young. We'll talk more about that when we get to the third reason for the minor premise in number 10. All right, so think about that. The first reason for the minor premise, the universe is not self-maintaining because it's running towards the state of entropy. If it's been eternal, if it's been going on forever, it would already be in that state. It's not there yet. The second reason for the minor premise is number 9. The sun and all the stars will eventually burn out. Now, this is a little mini argument. This is what got me interested in philosophy. I had a friend who brought this argument to my attention, and she asked me, do you think the sun is going to burn out? And I was like, no. And she gave me this argument, and it blew my mind. Not that the sun is going to burn out, but that you can give arguments for things and know things through arguments. So here's the argument. The sun is finite in size. It's about yay big in the sky, right? It's giving off heat. It's fairly obvious. Go out and stand in the Phoenix sun and you'll see it's giving off heat. It can't do this forever because it's finite. So eventually the sun will burn out. And if stars are also suns, then all of this stars will burn out eventually as well. And you might say, oh, but aren't new stars being born? Not forever. You can Google that too. Google heat death of the universe timeline. Look up heat death of the universe timeline, and you'll see that they begin with the Big Bang, and there's an end to the universe as we now know it. And it's because the energy that is there in the universe is being used up, and the suns can only regenerate for so long because the energy that goes into suns regenerating is being used up and can no longer be used in the same way. So it doesn't go on forever. So the sun and all the stars will eventually burn out. Wasn't that cool though? The sun is finite in size. It's giving off heat. It can't do this forever, so it's going to burn out eventually. Okay, that's the second reason for the minor premise, showing this universe is not self-maintaining. The third reason for the minor premise is in number 10, and this one's a little more involved. Perhaps the universe is like a big bang and a big crunch and a big bang and a big crunch, and this goes on eternally. So this is called the Big Bang Oscillating Universe Theory or Model. You can also Google that, look it up. It's not very popular anymore because... well, I'll put up a little video that shows you why. The video is called 3 Ways to End the Universe, I think. It's cute. It's very short. I'll put it up for you, but you can see the model. All right, so let's read through this. A materialist response has been to appeal to the Big Bang oscillating universe theory. Okay, so the non-materialist reply is this. One, and this is science, on empirical grounds, just by observing things, the nature of matter, the nature of the universe, the nature of the Big Bang, there is not enough matter in the physical universe for gravity to pull everything back together. So think of the universe as expanding, and as it's expanding, heavy bodies are becoming farther and farther from one another, and as they expand, there's no center of gravity to pull everything back together again. So as things get farther and farther apart, the likelihood of them coming back together becomes less and less because there's not enough gravity, because we're missing the amount of mass we need for that kind of gravity. And so they sometimes are looking for exotic matter, dark matter, missing matter to make up for the calculations to pull everything back together. But right now we don't have enough. So that's the empirical problem. But perhaps someday they find it, right? There's another problem, and it's called the logical problem. On logical grounds, the model of the Big Bang does not overcome the problem of entropy or sameness. At some point, the force pulling in will have to equal the force pushing out. So this is where you have to imagine there's this initial Big Bang and everything is expanding from this initial Big Bang. Well, that Big Bang doesn't just stop and halt and come back in. There are parts that are expanding while the outer parts are contracting. And so as the expansion is going outward and the contraction is coming inward, they come up against each other. And so you have two opposing forces coming up against each other, and they cancel each other out, which brings about sameness again. So the force pulling in will equal the force pushing out at some point, and sameness will be reached. Now, some say, well, what about this? At the center of each galaxy, incidentally, there are now estimates of 100 billion galaxies and 100 billion stars in each galaxy. So this is a gigantic universe. But at the center of a galaxy, there is a black hole that's causing it to have this spiral. And maybe the black hole is gobbling up all of the material in the area. And maybe as time goes on, black holes start to converge and cause a supermassive black hole, and that's what sucks everything back in. So we have this big crunch, and that could be an alternative way of explaining the big crunch. The question is, how does it expand again? And some have appealed to what's called a true vacuum. And a true vacuum is where there's no matter and no energy. And somehow this fluctuates. To a false vacuum. And a false vacuum is where there is energy, but there's no matter. But because E equals mc squared, once you have energy, you can get matter from that. And so that's the explanation of the origin of the universe. But notice, how do you get energy from no energy? It's like being from non-being. So that's not a very satisfying explanation. It goes against reason. It contradicts itself, being from non-being. So when the true vacuum is described as empty of matter and energy, in contrast to the false vacuum as empty of matter but not energy, the change so described involves being coming into existence from non-being. The reason for the minor premise is not overcome by appeal to black holes, antimatter, anti-universes, etc. So at the root of this argument, if matter is eternal, it will be self-maintaining. It's not self-maintaining, therefore it's not eternal. In order to get to that, it's not self-maintaining, to hold on to that it is self-maintaining, you have to give up reason. So either we give up reason and say being can come from non-being, whatever that means. It doesn't mean anything. It's a meaningless statement. Or you say, there's something wrong with this assumption that all that exists is matter and matter is eternal. Now let's look at number 11 here. This is a history of appeals to uncaused events or being from non-being. To explain change and diversity from an original unity and oneness in materialist terms has often involved an appeal to uncaused events. Uncaused things that are caused, another contradiction. So you can Google these names and look up their theories. Epicurus had the atomic swerve theory. Dirac had the evenly heated vacuum theory. Hoyle had the steady state theory. Russell had the cold ash heap view. Hawking and others had the true vacuum to false vacuum view. Historically, appeals have been made to something non-material to account for change in light of the difficulties in materialist explanations. For example, Aristotle was critiquing the materialists before him and saw that the problem with material monism is that matter can't be self-maintaining. So he proposed that there is some spirit that maintains the matter. He called it the prime mover, the unmoved mover. So here is a mini dialogue between a non-materialist and a materialist. A non-materialist is anybody else on the square besides a materialist. So the non-materialist says, appeal to uncaused events violates the laws of reason. And the materialist might say, why should reason be an absolute? Reason itself evolves as man evolves. Remember, that was their assumption. The non-materialist responds by saying, if reason is not absolute, then your claim all is matter is not rationally true. Why? Because we can't know it by reason, because you just said it's not absolute. Its logical opposite is not false, if it is true. Both may be true at the same time, which renders it meaningless. The materialist might say the statement all is matter is pragmatically true. It works for me. But the non-materialist response is that what works or satisfies is a statement about one's feelings, not about what is real. So we've just changed from giving an argument to making a statement about our feelings. The materialist might reply, as Sextus Empiricus did, about what is real, I make no statement. And this is what the materialists have been doing for like the past 150 years. We don't do metaphysics. We don't make statements about what is real, but they do. So this is a move to silence on this issue. And the non-materialist can say, as rational beings, we cannot give up reason. We can only give up our integrity. So either the material monist needs to provide a counterexample and show how matter is self-maintaining, or they should give up the assumption that matter is eternal. Okay, but that's only one problem with material monism. Next time, I'm going to pause on this one. Next time, we'll look at the problem of consciousness. So I'm going to put up a little video that goes with this video. I think it's called 3 Ways to End the Universe, or 3 Ways the Universe Might End. And it's a little video that goes through possibilities for the universe, if it could be self-maintaining. Now, I want you to think critically about it, because there are some assumptions in this video, and it ends with this sort of hopeful claim that I think is very unsubstantiated. So I hope that you will take notes, and I'll see you with the next video on does the soul exist? Is there something non-material? Do you have a soul? All right, that's where we're going next.